Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Boyson, and this week I have Dr. Roy Nambudripad of NAET, Nambudripad's Allergy Elimination Technique. Welcome to our show, Roy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and the reason I wanted you on is that your work and your mother's work, who is the inventor of this technique, made such a profound influence on my son and I when we were in a really hard loop of
Hmm.
allergic to everything, can't eat anything, reacting to everything. It and
Yeah.
and it really was a beam of hope when we
Hmm.
realized the connection between our mind and our body, and that there are ways to reverse these negative loops energetically. And it's not even woo woo, it's very scientific what you're doing. So that's why I want people on this show. When you hear that someone's got some sort of allergy or a sensitivity, you don't
Hmm.
have to just accept it. So, what would you like to, how would you describe Nambudripad's allergy elimination technique for those who have never heard about it?
Well, you actually did a good job there. I like that phrasing of, sort of negating that loop of the energy. So so I guess the one way to say it would be that subconsciously we can associate sort of symptoms with food substances or allergens in our world, essentially. So one aspect of it is we sort of unknowingly start to connect our brain body complex to certain foods and substances. And there are sort of different reasons for this and aspects that we've gotten into. One, for example, is emotions. So there's actually an emotional aspect sometimes. For example, I had a patient who had a car accident, and after the car accident would react negatively to the leather, and all types of leather products because they were, smelling the leather, touching leather when the car accident happened. They would get a headache, for example. Um, and it's nothing that we do knowingly, but it's just a subconscious connection we make. And so the NAT itself is like an acupressure sort of kinesiological sort of technique that we do. Nothing invasive. There's no medication, no surgery or procedure that sort of cuts you or you need to take anything orally. It's like a massage in a way. Is what when you look at it, that's kind of what most people would describe it, but it sort of taps into the nerve body complex that you were saying to negate that loop, so that your brain does not react the next time it touches, for example, in this case, leather, the same way it would react prior.
Right. And I remember in your mom's one of her books, a story about a woman who was eating a peach when she got a call that a family member had been in an accident and started
Yeah,
anaphylactic reactions to the peach after that. So,
exactly.
and the thing is, when I went through, I was lucky I had a fantastic local practitioner who we worked with every week for a long time. And the things that would come back that we were reacting to, I would have never I would have never guessed. And there was definitely an order. There was a protocol where there were
Hmm.
these sweeping things that most people were reacting to. And then you
Yeah.
start getting more and more specific. Is that still the way it works?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So that's actually really important. Over the years, since 1983, 84, when my mom first founded this technique, essentially in its very rough form, over those many decades, essentially, it's evolved to the point where we now have a sort of protocol that we follow, a formula of treatments that we do. And the reason we do it that way, almost like a therapy program, or like a system of treatments that you do before you start to jump into major triggers, is actually for safety. We've found over the years that if you jump right into a major trigger, like for example that peach that you mentioned, for that in that case, there's a chance that that patient could react violently or have an anaphylactic type reaction, right? Even just putting that peach in the hand right away. So before we trigger those types of things, we actually do a set of treatments before. We call them the basics. Essentially, if you get some of our books and you read about it, you'll hear that term called the basics. And essentially, it's a number of treatments that we do initially to help set the immune system up so that when we get to, whatever the main trigger may be, leather, peach, etc., that the person will not react as, bad compared to initially, like if you were to put it in their hand, for example. So it's sort of like a process that we go through to make sure the patients are going to be able to tolerate the treatment.
Yes, and when we did it, and guys, it's been a while because we got so well with the variety of things that we discovered. Um, Back in the day, there would be some of these basic ones, and you put the vial in your hand, and the practitioner tests whether that makes you stronger or weaker. So at the highest level, there's that idea: things and energies make you stronger or weaker. Like that. That is the
Yeah,
highest level idea
right.
that my Western reductionist mindset really couldn't fathom how many different things could be our kryptonite or make us much stronger. And I remember like the practitioner works through and then figures out what the most practical one to treat is. And then there's a process too, though, where you avoid it for a certain amount of time and eat a little differently. And then you come back and check. Did we actually clear it? Is it safe for this person to be around this thing? Is that still roughly how it goes?
Yeah, so you're referring to muscle testing essentially. It's that's one way, and especially when my mother was first getting involved in this in the 80s, in the early 80s, she really had no clue as to what she was delving into. And there was no blood test or any kind of machine that you can use at that time to really accurately tell you anything. So this is kind of she learned this concept of muscle testing in her schooling, and but I've heard other patients and other practitioners use other forms of testing as well. History, of course, helps. Even how you react when you touch something or etc. So a lot of those things can help, but muscle testing is one way, an easy way where we don't have to, as I said, puncture you, give you anything, hook you up to anything, and we can sort of it can guide sort of the process a lot more efficiently. Sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes you can get mistakes with muscle testing too, just like any test. But the real key to the NAT and what makes it really successful is the treatment part of it, actually. Once you have the triggers and you identify them, that is a big part, of course. But then the NAT, what sets it apart, because muscle testing and other forms of testing have been around for many years, of course, many centuries, I mean. But the treatment, which is essentially a massage-like manipulation on the back. That's really what my mom figured out. And that when you do that, and you might need a number of sessions maybe for certain things, but in many cases, one or two treatments can help you reduce the reactions to, for example, at peach or leather or a medication or anything. We have found a whole variety of things, like you mentioned, all kinds of things where you can reduce the reaction to that. We initially, when my mom was first doing this, for the first several years, she would only use real foods, real fabrics, real chemicals. She would put in a glass jar or directly in the hand. But what ended up happening was that those can be very powerful, very potent sometimes. And so the homeopathic vials that we use now over time evolved so that we don't have to trigger the patient so intensely right off the bat. Eventually, you may have to get to, like, for example, the real peach, right? Like we mentioned in that example, or real leather. But you can first use homeopathic samples of that first to sort of gently guide the patient in that process too. So you might see some practitioners using real substances as well as those vials.
I remember that being a leap of faith I had to make where I'm seeing this vial that says something like egg, and
Right.
it's filled with maybe a clear liquid or nothing. I mean, I remember being like, are you sure? And
Yeah.
then I would even bother my practitioner and be like, I would try to I would have her fool me because I was, well, to your point, when we were using muscle testing, there are times you can consciously override a muscle test. So I would have her blind test or mix up the order of things and try to make sure that it was really my subconscious and I wasn't intentionally overriding it. And I
Yeah.
remember, like, how does anyone ever, like, how could the energy of my notebook be in a little vial? Can you say anything about how do you even homeopathically create an
Well,
energy like that?
notebook would not be in the vial necessarily, but like we get these samples from different homeopathic companies essentially. Foods are really where it really was the main thing where we started using those vials. But in some instances, we actually have to use the real thing. For example, the temperatures like heat and cold. Or humidity. We actually there's no vial for those things. We have to use actual like ice pack or actual heat. And there are certain things that we don't have vials of, certain infections or vaccines or certain heavy metals that we might have to actually find the real thing. But a lot of things we do find in the homeopathic world. And my mom has adopted some of those into the system. And again, it's really just a sort of starting point. But it's amazing how you'll see people react to those vials. We haven't done enough research to show why that's the case. But partly maybe when they see the label, they might be thinking of it. But there's actually an active study going on right now that we're doing a large study in autism where we've blinded the samples too. We have some vials that are blinded, some vials that are with the label on it, and then so that's in the process of we're in the process of getting that going. Once that's ready, we'll publish that. But we've had other publications as well already published in the medical literature showing effects. And one of the studies I published myself, it was on peanut anaphylaxis actually. And it was at the time it was a 19-year-old girl. It took us about 2 years, but she was actually able to ingest a peanut without reaction. Where initially she had violent reactions. She would have to avoid certain types of food and things like this. So yeah, so there is some data out there.
It's a theme that I've seen with some of my guests here that, and in the movement longevity practice that I also teach, where you needs to create this baseline of peace and associate it with the things that used to create a violent reaction, and that the
Mm,
body can really only change in this state of peace, and yet rebuilding a foundation. Because honestly, guys, wow, when we were in that spiral, we been to yet another naturopath. We had another blood round. We had another, and just getting our blood drawn was traumatic for a little kid. And
yeah.
and even and yet the test did help. Like I could come and say, oh, here's the list of 150 things we're avoiding. And we
Yeah.
could come with the actual blood allergies. What's the R something type
Uh,
of true
yeah. A
allergy?
RAST. Was it probably RAST or IgG?
Yes.
Yeah.
So not that those were in vain, but
Yeah.
the
Those
nice thing
help for
was
sure. Hmm.
it's they definitely, and so I
They
don't
help.
want to disparage that, but we were
Yeah.
just in such a loop that
Yeah.
most of the tests were just making us avoid, 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 and
Mhm.
just
Yes.
that
Right.
fear spiral when things are not going your way. And
Right.
then you just feel like there's less and less safety. Every birthday party is traumatic. Like, what's
Right.
on the? Can I get on this flight? Are they serving the
Exactly.
whatever? Not that
Yeah.
thank God, we never had the anaphylactic level, but we had this neuroimmune
Hmm.
response that was so obvious in these
Yes.
these ticks and the
Yes.
Tourette's and the other things. And so
Right.
reading your mom's book just gave me hope. She even wasn't that you she talked about in the book that when you were an infant, you were reacting to a lot of things.
Yeah, so I was a very sick child until I was about 5 years old is when she, started developing this or, researching this concept that we know now as NAT. But before that, when I was 3, 2, et cetera, I had, severe skin eczema and I think even one of the doctors said that I even need surgery on my intestines because I wasn't able to hold down food, et cetera. So she was going through a lot when I was young. And out of desperation is actually I'm the reason she found NAT actually. And my father as well was quite sick too. So as a family, we were not doing too well, but because of NAT, they're still going strong. I'm doing well, and I don't have any, for the most part, reactions to foods. There are a couple of things I still react to a little bit, but for the most part, I've been pretty good.
And in the book she described how your focus went way up too.
Yes, right, of course. Yeah, absolutely. There's another aspect to NH that we found later on too, which is not just the allergy or sensitivity concept, but absorption. So if you're allergic, quote unquote, to, let's say, a B vitamin of some type, you can take all the B vitamins you want orally, inject, etc. It just will, pee right out of you. Your body has to recognize it in a way so that it absorbs. And calcium is another example. Some of these things, and likewise on the opposite spectrum with toxicity. So, if there's a heavy metal in a vaccine or some sort, if you're allergic to it, it can start to build up in you. And if you treat for it with NAT, you can detox from it. So you can actually get the vaccine and not have. So we've actually seen where patients, where we get treatments, they don't react to a vaccination like they used to prior, et cetera, or any other medication or any substance really. We don't make a distinction. Anything out there, peanuts, chemicals, et cetera, fragrances, and emotions, as I mentioned, they can all be toxic. And if you treat them, you can start to, assimilate them if you need it.
You said a couple of important things there. One is absorption. When we try taking 1,000 different supplements, it
Yeah,
can become toxic when you're not absorbing it. And
correct.
not all supplements are good for you, even if you think it
Correct.
is. Yeah. And that's
Yes.
one thing I took away was
Right.
really my personal. Now I use a pendulum. I know it sounds woo woo, but I
Mhm.
learned to really hone in. When I had some like gastrointestinal stuff, and all the stuff I thought I was doing that was healthy was not. Like I was, and I had a friend who does, she's an acupuncturist who does her energy medicine stuff, and I sent her pictures of all the foods I was at, and she was like, nope, nope, not that. And she's like, that. I'm like, what?
Mhm.
Exactly the opposite of what I thought was healthy for me at that time, as my
Mhm.
body was going through this stressor. And things can change. Things can and that's actually the most beautiful thing. We can change so much for the better than we thought, even if it seems like a life sentence, like, oh, I'm going to avoid gluten my whole life. So the other thing that you were talking about was, so we have the need to absorb something, whether it's good or bad, and then the treatments making us more and more able, a more fluid nervous system. We can handle more and more stressors. And
Correct.
I wanted to say, the funny thing is, when we did the mercury vial, and guys, I'm vaccine hesitant. Everybody out there knows that, but I'm not taking away vaccines. And if I go back to West Africa, I'm probably going to get an updated yellow fever shot because the risk is so high if I get that disease. Now, at the same time, there were little babies getting all these shots. There's got to be more research. That's just where I stand on it. I love that you guys are not villainizing the possibility that for as much good as they could do, how could you deliver safety along with them? And so one thing that hadn't occurred to me is I'd had all these mercury fillings before I had my son,
Uh-huh.
and I'd had them for years. When you take that and then you add a small assault, so a baby born exposed to all this mercury in their mother's bloodstream, right? And then
Right.
they've already are at their limit. They're like, I'm full of mercury. And then you add one little assault, like if there was a little thimerosal in something, boy, the mercury was the one that shocked me. That was one we had to do over and over and come and go, and we had the biggest upside. But who would have thought that it was what was in the pregnant mother's mouth? Who would have thought that that was the real thing that created the sensitivity later to the flu shot or whatever? All right, so tell me any more patterns that you've ended up seeing. Like, do patients end up being with you long term? Are there any like things that this worked for? That What kinds of conditions does this work for? It's not just food allergies.
Well, maybe I can, the easier way to say it would be things that we have not seen as much of an improvement in conditions that are more difficult to treat. Let me say it that way. So, the biggest one is ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. We have not seen a case of improvement with NAT, at least as far as I know. There might be a practitioner out there that may have had success, but I have not heard of it yet. I know I've had a couple of patients of my own, as well as my mother, where we tried treating with NAT and they unfortunately succumbed. They did not get better. The other one is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is quite difficult for us as well. It may be because it's more of a lifestyle change that's needed, really. It's not really a single trigger that we can treat, um, like a certain chemical or emotion that we can sort of treat to help with it. I have heard some patients getting better, but including NAT with another sort of lifestyle program, restricting their food, etc. The other one that's a little better that we do see some improvement, although some cases I've heard some difficulty with, is multiple sclerosis. Um, but in that case, mercury is, as you mentioned, is one of the things that I know we've heard many people claim and say that by treating that helps. But in some cases it doesn't. So it's kind of iffy. But those are the three. So ALS, type 2 diabetes, and MS are the three conditions where I would typically say NAT may be limited. MS is the better of those three in terms of treating. But ironically, type 1 diabetes, as crazy as it sounds, is actually a little bit easier for us to treat than type 2. We've actually seen pretty dramatic results in patients with type 1 diabetes with treating different triggers. Triggers are different for everyone, so I can't really generalize, but um, those would be the three that I would think of. In terms of conditions that NAT can help with, the way I would address it, or the way I would say is anything that you can find a trigger for. So like if like your headache comes on when you eat that chocolate, especially a specific type of chocolate or something of that nature, that's where NAT can really shine. And as you mentioned, in Western medicine, it's just really avoidance is all they have for like the RAS, the IgE type stuff, where patients are allergic to, peanut, right, and shrimp. You really have to avoid, and for sure you do have to avoid them. But NAT may be able to help you to at least be exposed to them in some form without having as severe of a reaction. So, for example, it can help with children not necessarily eating those foods, but being in a similar room with it, where they don't have to worry about calling 911 all the time. They may accidentally be sort of secondhand nature exposed to a food after going through NAT and not necessarily need to call a doctor or go to the ER. So that's a huge benefit in itself. In order to be able to fully tolerate those foods, that's a whole different process. It's a very long process, and the practitioner needs to be fully trained in how to do that. So not every practitioner, any two practitioner knows how to do that. But that's very rare that we would need to go that far. Most commonly, it's, they have some general symptoms that they just want to get better with. And then secondarily, they'll find out after the process that they actually, are able to sort of tolerate exposure to certain things. That's typically the story we'll hear.
So the trigger for people knowing that this could help them, I know ours was we'd been given this list by a naturopath from a food sensitivity test that we were down to so few foods that we were lucky. I had a friend who's an acupuncturist who was getting trained in this. So that's how we stumbled into it. I'm not sure that I mean, how do other people find you guys?
It's usually by word of mouth. We're not a very well-known entity. We're still working on research and trying to validate this. And it is, unfortunately, over the last many years, we've had some practitioners. We don't have a really sort of a licensure or a state board that we run. So we just train people sort of who are already licensed acupuncturists, chiropractors, doctors, nurses, etc. And therapists, and then they will go out and roll out the treatments. But sometimes those practitioners don't do a very good job. I'll be honest. They don't really follow what we say, and we've recently in the recent years have done a much better job of sort of eliminating some of those people from our website. Making sure that our referral list is solid. But those who do a great job, usually they do find that they get good results, and then their patients refer other patients to them. So that's why it's been kind of word of mouth recently. But I think with social media coming out, last several years, that's actually helped quite a bit. Because before the internet, actually, big pharma and all these other entities out there had a big, grasp on kind of what was information, quote unquote, right? So, and NAT was a victim of that, I'll be honest. So we were very small, sort of, project. It was just my mom really on her own trying to, and she's still active, by the way, teaching practitioners through it, virtually and stuff. But it is, it's been difficult in the past, but it's getting a little easier for us to spread that message. But I think now, in the last several years, I think more and more people are realizing that, we don't just listen to what, this person says, this doctor or this reference, patients have more power with social media. So they're starting to explore and realize that, hey, maybe this, woo-woo method that everyone's dissing out there might have something for me. And that's kind of what we've been relying on, to be honest with you, is just results. If it helps somebody, then that's kind of what we go with. And we've kept it in that community. And I think we're slowly growing in that, like a grassroots type style.
Thank you. Yeah, results first.
Yeah.
Results are what the future of medicine is all about. And
Yeah.
I
Especially
love,
with social media.
yes, testimonials. I started
Right.
this podcast because I was like, wow,
Yeah.
I had all these years where I did tried so many things. And if I didn't
Mhm.
share it with someone
Exactly.
who doesn't have the luxury or the willingness and the firepower, like I can't imagine where there's a family where the mom has two jobs
Yeah.
and they can barely pick their kids up from childcare. How would they
Mhm.
ever get at what really works the fastest? Because those
Right.
people need the best stuff the fastest. So that's why I'm really
Yeah.
glad, to your point, that all of our voices are rising about what really
Yes.
works, and a lot of it is very gentle and subtle,
Mhm.
and it does, it's not and well, it's, your work is kind of immediate, kind of not. It's layers and layers
Yes. Oh, of
of
course.
over time. So,
Right.
and
Definitely.
how would I, like, I know we were, our practitioner was working through, and we were early with our practitioner, and we went down to visit your mom too because I wanted to go to the source, and
Hmm.
and the whole thing helped us a lot. At a certain point we felt good, and then
Hmm.
we didn't keep doing much for maintenance. What is it that people would need to expect, like, as far as the depth of commitment to this
Okay.
technique?
Yeah, so typically I would say there's about 15 to 17 sort of sessions that you have to do initially, for most people, for most people. But as sort of like that, when we were talking originally about the basics, that word, that's what that encompasses. So those are actually a number of sessions that you have to do before you can start to get into a major trigger, like for example, like the peach or the leather that we were mentioning initially. But in that process of the basics, many patients also will actually start to feel better too. In
Yeah.
fact, some patients have actually would say that they actually feel improvements after the very first treatment.
Yeah. Yes.
So that can happen. I would say the more severe the case, the longer it typically takes to get better, which makes sense. It took time for that person to get chronically ill, right? It's not going to get better overnight for sure. If someone has less complexity, if there's just like a few things, that are bothering them, they might get better quicker. Um, but generally speaking, I would say those 15 to 17 basics are crucial, and then maybe a few more treatments after that. That should give you a rough, so about 20 sessions would give most people a really good sense as to this treatment and any benefits that may have, come from that. But also you can expect some improvements to come even before that.
Do those need to be within any particular time frame, like
Yeah,
weekly?
so right. So you can do them every 4 hours, actually. So there are some practitioners that do, like, for example, 3 treatments in a day, and you can actually space them out. There's an avoidance that you do with each of these treatments, I'm sure you're aware of. That can be a little bit tricky because you have to do multiple avoidances, so it's pretty intense. So there are some people who can do like a number of treatments, squeezed in there, but it's usually more for, like, patients who are here on a limited time or from out of country or out of state type of thing. For the most part, and what I would recommend is people do like once a week, or so, because the other thing benefit of that is each treatment that you do, it'll give you some time to evaluate how it helped you. If you do a bunch in a day, let's say, or in a week, you won't necessarily know which one helped the most. And that's actually part of the evaluation process. So, you'll see something like egg mix, for example, which is essentially protein, is one of the samples that we treat. So if somebody does that treatment, one of these basics that I called, then and if someone gets better with that, that's actually very valuable information, right, to know. Whereas if you did a few other treatments within that same week, you won't, and the benefit comes a few days later, you won't necessarily know which one helped. So I would recommend for most people, if you're able to, with time, once a week is a pretty solid schedule.
And that's one reason it sounds like acupuncturists, and did you say chiropractors are the main type of practitioners that offer this as a
So
service?
the most common are acupuncturists. We do have chiropractors that also in a number of states that have studied NAT and are actively doing it. We also have some nurses. We also train massage therapists as well. Anyone who has a state license in their state to provide, especially manual therapy, and who has a professional license, should be able to at least study this course. Now, whether they're able to actually perform it with their license in their state is sort of variable. Some people will just study the course just for their own knowledge or research purposes. But yeah, the most common would be an acupuncturist, for example.
And my history was I was already going to the acupuncturist because we were in such a spiral that
Yeah,
adding this in was a really easy thing for
yeah,
us to do at the time.
sure.
And then one question I always wondered about the avoidance period. So basically, guys, let's say you had a vial that represented, say, egg or egg protein, and you're avoiding anything that has any energy like that. Even
Correct.
if you had a feather pillow,
Correct.
you are not chickening. You are not eating chicken. You are not
Yeah.
touching eggs. And then there's a simple diet you're eating for that day. Like it
Mhm.
was usually very carby. It was usually like rice and potatoes. And at the time, I was running with all these semi-carnivore people that were scoffing at carbs. And at the time I was like, wow, why does this work? Like, yeah, eating this simple food is working. Is there
Yeah.
anything you want to say about why or
It's
how that
interesting.
period
Yeah,
worked?
well, so there are multiple theories. I know my mom has her theory, which is, of course, the allergy aspect, right? When you're not consuming a food that you're quote unquote allergic or sensitive to, your body will start to heal. We have a 25 or 24-hour period of avoidance, essentially, which really relates to the acupuncture meridians. So it's 2 hours per meridian. There's 12 meridians. That's why 24. But we give an extra hour as a benefit there. But actually the first hour after the treatment is included. That's why it's 25 hours. Anyway, but it's a whole day-night cycle, and it allows your body to sort of detox from not being exposed to that allergen. Of course, the longer you stay away from something, the better. Just, you'll be able to heal. But we did it this way so that you can sort of do another treatment a few days later if you want to, or even 4 hours later, right? So as I mentioned, you can do multiple avoidances just to help people pass through these number of sessions. But the other theories to it too is that now we know about certain concepts like food intolerance, right? And like certain fiber, certain vitamins can cause irritation to you. So when you have very simple like white rice, for example, it's easier on your system. I'm not sure about that, but I would say that the concept of the desensitization to allergies, that applies to that. So when you're not ingesting the egg protein, your body's able to sort of adjust and heal. I guess that would be the way to think of it.
And especially you're interrupting a pattern, even if it was only
Yeah.
that, even if it
Right.
was that, we don't often the things we're
Yes.
reacting to the most, we're putting back in every single day. So
Yes, exactly.
that a reset idea. And
That's another theory.
food
Yeah.
elimination diets also work on some of that.
Yes,
I
exactly.
I
Right.
started with that in the very beginning too.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, and what I got from you earlier is it helps many things. You listed ones that for sure doesn't help, that which was ALS, Alzheimer's, right? And
ALS, Lou Gehrig's
oh,
disease,
Lou Gehrig's. It doesn't help Lou
amyotrophic
Gehrig.
lateral sclerosis. Yeah,
Oh,
I think it's an autoimmune. Well, it's up for debate. but most people would consider it to be an autoimmune process. But we have tried so many cases of that and not seen much improvement at all with NAT with that.
And you said it doesn't help type 2 diabetes, but you've had surprising results with type 1.
Yeah,
And
type two, we've had patients get better using NAT, but usually in conjunction with some other type of program as well. Like they lose weight, they're et cetera. But yeah, I mean, if there's a trigger that you can find, then NAT usually is more sort of, helpful. But in type 2 diabetes, it's not usually one trigger. There's like multiple things.
so it sounds like there are a ton of things it's helped with. What
Yes. Oh,
are
yeah.
some of those? But list off some of
Oh,
the many.
Oh man, you name it. Essentially, other than those, like headache, fibromyalgia, even we've even seen some cancers related to certain emotions, and when we start treating them, they feel better. We've had, of course, allergies, food allergies, chemical sensitivities, toxicities to different things. Um, Rashes, skin rashes, things of that nature. So yeah, pretty much most other conditions. It's anything that where there's a trigger that you can find, I think NAT is worth looking into.
Wow, yeah. And how does someone even start looking? I didn't even know to start looking for triggers.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think those elimination diets or changing the pattern of your sort of daily life would be a great way to start. And if you notice changes just by changing, your atmosphere or your food intake, and then you can go back to it like in a few weeks, and if you start getting the problem again, then you know that there's something that's sort of causing it, right? That can kind of help you. And so for example, if you have a headache, as I said, with chocolate and you notice that it only happens each time you drink coffee or eat chocolate, let's say, and then you stop those things and it gets better, and then you're re-exposed to those things and then it comes back. That's when you can kind of ascertain that maybe there's a problem with certain food items or certain things, and that's where NAT may be able to help.
And it sounds like if you just start to have the fear of things, like if your life has gotten smaller and smaller and you're avoiding too many things to relax, that's got a huge nervous system cost to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Western medicine has very little to offer for those types of situations. As you said, avoidance really only, or maybe certain medications that suppress your system, that it's not really designed to heal, go to the root cause of the problem. And in this case, like as I said, again, some trigger, some physiological trigger that's caused by food, right? You have to avoid the food. That's the only way. And if it's really vital for you to be exposed to that food, that's where NAT could maybe help you reintroduce that, to in your life.
I love that, taking away the fear of things and you're just harmonizing. You don't
Yes.
have to have a war mindset. You can have a harmony mindset. I have a friend who taught me about harmonizing spaces. You can harmonize a 5G tower instead of
Mhm.
getting all worked up and angry about what they're doing and the
Yeah.
conspiracies. You can harmonize with
Yes.
almost
Right.
anything. Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
that's helpful in this day and age where we're sometimes don't have control over these external things, and we're forced, like for example, take a vaccination or whatever. So if you must, you can treat for it, and then you will be able to take the vaccination without having usually side effects, which is good. And
which
we've
is
seen that.
awesome. I
Yeah.
love it. And the last thing is, I'm sure, that was what, 10 years ago, a little longer, when we were in the process of all those NAET treatments. And sometimes I wonder when people talk about going to different practitioners and there's some machine that reads some frequency or they do some other thing. How is this different? Have you heard about those other things? How is this
Yeah,
different
so in
when?
the beginning days, and in some years after, again, my mom was and others were looking for ways to, have some sort of objective measure to test for these allergies, right? So that's where a lot of these machines started to come into play. But since about, I want to say about 20 years back, so since about 2008 or so, we stopped using those kinds of things because they were not very consistent. So the one way to test it or test the validity of those things would be if you do that test and then the next day come right back and do it again, and it gives you different results. We used to see that quite a bit, actually. I mean, the reason people were trying those things was, convenience, right, and trying to help the guide their life. But the thing is, you want to make sure they're accurate, right? And so the way to do that is if you do those tests and they're giving you different results, then you kind of know. With some of these blood tests, like you mentioned, the RAS, the IgE, those are very consistent. So we actually adopted those. But the value to those though are for really extreme allergies, like anaphylaxis or really life-threatening allergies. That's where they're very useful. But for like sensitivities and mild reactions, or maybe even these things where it causes you an emotional disturbance or like a subconscious sort of effect, there's no machine or anything out there that can really help you. That's where some of these methods that you mentioned, pendulum, people use muscle testing. There are various methods. People, even just intuition. Some people will just know when they hold something, they feel something in their tummy or they just don't feel good. Whatever way you can develop to help you in your life, like avoid certain things, I think is useful, and it'll guide you. And then what you do with that is the next step. Of course, NAT is one of those things that I would recommend that you can do to sort of desensitize so that you don't have to keep doing that.
And I love that you just gave us a practical tool. One thing I like that what you're saying is develop some kind of sense that you can evaluate.
Yeah.
Whether you need to evaluate with a blood test or you evaluate with muscle testing or you go to that, and that you need a consistent way to do the evaluation, ideally
Yes.
connecting, because honestly, I've wrecked myself thinking I was following my intuition. And I
Yeah,
doubt that most people are like me.
that's true.
I didn't realize sometimes we have like, I don't know whether it's yeast or whatever. There can be like a craving for something
Yeah.
when that can be your worst enemy. Is there anything you
Yeah.
want to say about that?
That's a good point, actually. So, yeah, I know my mom often talks about aversion and addiction. So it's the same in Chinese medicine, there's a yin and yang. So that applies to the allergy concept too, where you can be addicted to something or you can be really averse to something as well. And they both are abnormal. You need to be in balance. So if you're really craving the chocolate all the time, that's actually not a good thing, and you can be allergic to it, quote unquote. Or if even the smell of chocolate makes you sick and nauseous, that's also not good. That can also be an allergy. So you should be sort of even keel. You can have a bit of chocolate, not, really require it or need it. And that's where NAT can help, oftentimes in many cases.
Wow, what a wonderful set of tools. And how do people find you, your work, places online, starting from like the easy and free to digging in deeper?
Yeah, so the best way to do it is go to www.naet.com. That's the main website and the proper website. I know there are a lot of sort of practitioners out there that are claiming that they're doing NAT, but that may not necessarily be doing so. If you go to our website, and we really have no way of controlling a lot of it, unfortunately, especially with social media, people can say all kinds of things. But our website has a referral list that we've vetted all those practitioners, and they're on there. And also, we have some videos on that website as well. One of them is to help. There's an introduction video to help them explain what NAT is, and in that video, there's also some tips for patients to do at home. We call it massaging the gates, for example, is an acupressure point system that we do, and that's kind of explained in one of the videos there. So there's some additional tips that patients can find in the thing. But the most important thing is the practitioner locator, which is on that website. And if you just type in your zip code or your country, and you can do a whole search. And there are some areas where there are no practitioners, unfortunately. We're working on, expanding that, but we want to balance sort of, proper NAT alongside the number of NAT practitioners. I mean, it's more important that we have people who are doing it properly than have a large amount to be, really, because we want to make sure it's spread correctly. Um, so that's a big change that actually happens a couple of decades ago. We were just before just training a lot of people and not really, paying attention to what they were doing, to be honest. We made a change in that. We've been more strict in making sure that they're following sort of basic guidelines.
Right. And when I think now about when you're addressing something, especially a serious allergy, you don't want a
Yes,
partial treatment and think
correct.
that you're cured and go eat that
Exactly.
thing and get the 911 call,
Well
right?
said. That's the most important thing to say in this video, actually, is, any patient out there or any person that's watching this video needs to be very careful. Do your due diligence on the practitioner and on our website. But having said all that, there is hope, for these people. NAT does work for many, many people, but you do have to be careful and be aware that it is a process. And if anyone says that they can cure you overnight of an issue, be wary of that kind of thing. It's not going to, usually for most people, they're not going to get feel improvements right away, but in some cases they may. It just depends.
And on that related note is effectiveness. If you have a rookie practitioner is just experimenting around and a vetted practitioner is 15 sessions and you go to someone who isn't very experienced, you're talking about doubling or tripling the cost of the number of services, let alone, I mean, so it sounds like you're providing a great service. To be cautious about who is a vetted
Practitioner, yeah.
listed practitioner that's on your website.
We have a ranking system on our website too, that if patients can go in and see. So if for example, if there's no one within many miles of your area, this is the only person you can go to. They might be a lower ranked person. In other words, they might not have as much training. However, at least they can provide a service to you. We don't want to take that away from someone. But if you're in an area where there's a ton of practitioners, then you might be able to be more choose, specific practitioners that fit your sort of profile that you want to go to. So it's kind of variable, but I would say, actually since 2006, sorry, 2015, I'm sorry, we've started doing online virtual trainings of practitioners. And actually it's been quite successful. It's actually been a really good program. I would say it's even better than the live training sessions in many cases because there's quite a bit of material these practitioners need to learn. And with the online format, they're able to go at their own pace and learn it properly. And so the education actually is improved, I would say. And so even the rookie quote unquote practitioners are actually doing a really good job since that time period.
I agree. There's so much great learning we can do with Zoom with the world's best
Yes.
and convey the most electronically that would be taking a lot more time in person. I agree.
Especially it's like a textbook type of step-by-step sort of process as opposed to hands-on. The hands-on portion of NET is actually quite simple. It's knowing when to do certain things is the tricky part. And that, and the explanations and the reasonings and how to think about what triggers may be for this person. That's a more of a sort of detailed process that requires explanation, whereas the hands-on is actually not that bad. It's not that easy and not that hard.
A lot of detective work of both the
Yes,
practitioner
correct.
and the client. I wanted
Right.
to say also, if any of us could put ourself in the shoes of someone who is deathly allergic to something, I'm lucky that was not us. And I can't even put myself in the shoes of what your nervous system is going to be constantly vigilant because that threat could show up because someone handed you food that
Yeah.
they thought it didn't have walnuts, but it did.
Yes.
I can't imagine the level of value that
Yes.
something like this has for someone in that situation.
Absolutely. In fact, that's really well said because unknowingly, when you're exposed to something, that's no fault of your own. But if you have NAT and by chance it could help you even reduce the reaction somewhat, that's a huge benefit. So that's where I think like accidental exposure and reducing the reactions to those allergens, that's where NAT is really a good sort of thing to try. At least, not intending to eat the food or whatever or being exposed to on a daily basis, but at least just preventing an emergency would be a huge benefit, obviously.
What a great compliment to emergency medicine, right?
Yes,
So,
right.
Dr. Roy Nambudripad, NAET, he's down in Orange County, website naet.com. His mom has written several books that are also available. I know that's how I got started, although you're saying there are videos that are straight to it on your website. Is there anything you want to say in closing for our audience?
Yeah, so a lot of the books and the material are actually available on our website as well. They're no longer available on Amazon, but we have them mainly on our website, essentially. Yeah, there are videos, as you mentioned, on our website as well that people can search. But yeah, I would just tell any person that's watching this to just be careful, do their due diligence, and investigate before they embark on this. But once they do, to be committed to the process, it may take some time. And if they can do that, I think I would say about 85% of people would feel some benefit from doing this process.
Wow, great. Well, thank you so much taking your time out of your busy practice on a Sunday afternoon.
Oh, my
Uh,
pleasure.
and again, thank you so much for helping us when we needed it the most.
Oh, of course. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.